17th of November 2024, and at the Circuit de Barcelona Catalunya in Spain, a new MotoGP World Champion had been crowned. Against all the odds, it was Jorge Martin riding for the Pramac squad who would take his first ever Premier Class title after an intense fight with the reigning champion that season, Pecco Bagnaia. Despite only taking 3 wins that year, and Pecco achieving a personal best of 11, his consistency throughout the season, combined with the number of sprint wins he achieved on the Saturday, was enough to make him the first rider in the MotoGP era to win the title with a satellite team, a feat that seemed impossible just a couple of years prior. Thing is though, whilst what he did was a great achievement, it should be worth pointing out that Martin isn't the first to win the title with a satellite team. In the previous 500cc era, there were 5 previous satellite champions, which were Kenny Roberts Sr., Marco Lucinelli, Franco Uncini, Eddie Lawson, and the man who previously held the title for the last satellite champion, whose season we are going to be talking about today, and it also gives me an excuse to talk about my favourite rider again. That man of course being the one and only Valentino Rossi. After winning both the 125 and 250cc titles in both 1997 and 1999 respectively, ironically the birth years of me and my younger brother, Rossi at the turn of the millennium would finally make the step up to the Premier class, which back then was known as the 500cc class. Rossi would contest this season as a solo competitor, once again racing for the Nastro Azzurro squad, the same team he won the 125 and 250cc titles with, and would that year ride on a factory spec Honda, which was backed by the Repsol Honda team as a result of them seeing a lot of potential in the Italian. Not only that, but Rossi, courtesy of Repsol Honda, would have Jeremy Burgess as his personal mentor, having previously been Mick Doohan's chief engineer before the Australian was forced to retire due to injury. Rossi's first season in the Premier class would end up being successful, as despite retiring in the first 2 races of the season, he would grab 3 podium finishes within the next 4 races, all of which were 3rd places, and then on his 9th or 10th would come through in changeable conditions at Donington to take his first ever Premier class win, fending off from both the Suzuki of Kenny Roberts Jr. and the Aprilia of Jeremy McWilliams in a close fight. Apart from Valencia, where he crashed out of the race, Rossi would finish on the podium in 6 of the final 7 races, which also included a win at Shakira-Pagua in Rio de Janeiro. His run of podium finishes ensured that in his first year, he would finish 2nd in the championship, 49 points behind eventual champion that year, Kenny Roberts Jr. To say it was his first year, and considering he was with a satellite team, it was an amazing achievement, and the fact that he was also able to beat all 3 Repsol Honda riders, who all struggled throughout the year, including reigning champion that season Alex Crivier, was also a result that made people take notice. With Repsol Honda still booked up for 2001, with Toru Yukara partnering alongside Alex Crivier, Rossi remained with the Nastro Azzurro team for 2001, once again having the backing from the main team. But luckily for Rossi, he once again proved that he didn't need to be in the main team. However, unlike 2000, he would prove this in a much bigger way. The first race of the season would take place at the popular Suzuka circuit, which back then used to be the home of the Japanese Motorcycle Grand Prix, before Motegi, which was already on the calendar, took over the reins of the Grand Prix name, following the tragic death of Daijiro Kato in 2003. Rossi would qualify down in 7th, a position he'd become accustomed to in later years, whilst good friend Loris Capirossi would take the first pole of the season for the West Ponds team. However, Capirossi would end up being an afterthought due to a big talking point that happened during the race. After charging his way up to 4th, Rossi would get stuck behind the Marlboro Yamaha of Max Biaggi, a man who Rossi knew very well as a result of them having the same manager. Towards the end of lap 5, Rossi would try and go for a move on Biaggi at the Casio chicane, but Max would shut the door, forcing Rossi to stand his bike up to avoid contact. Despite this though, Rossi would still get a good run on Biaggi at the exit of the chicane. But whilst trying to hang it around the outside, Rossi would end up getting shoved onto the grass by Biaggi in a move that looked deliberate on Biaggi's part, judging from his leg movements while side by side with the doctor. Somehow, Rossi would not lose a place to both Toru Yukara and Noriyuki Haga, managing to outbrake the pair of them on the approach to turn 1. Rossi would try again to overtake Biaggi, this time on the approach to Spoon Curve, but Biaggi would once again close the door on him, once again forcing Rossi to stand his bike up to avoid contact. This in turn saw Rossi briefly lose a place to Yukawa before re-overtaking him quickly into the 130R, which in turn allowed Haga to re-overtake his fellow compatriot at the exit of the Casio Triangle. Rossi then set his sights on Biaggi again, and not wasting any time, Rossi would blast past Biaggi down the pit straight and would then cut right across him before they broke into turn 1. Rossi, after finally passing Biaggi, would then mid-corner stick his middle finger up towards Biaggi, showing his frustration towards his aggressive riding. Rossi would then waste no time disposing of Shinya Nakano and Gary McCoy and would blast off into the distance to cruise to take the first win of the season, whilst Biaggi was able to grab the final podium spot in 3rd. After the race, both of them blasted each other in the press conference, taking little digs at each other over their aggressive fight. Little did we know at the time that this aggressive battle would lead to an intense rivalry between the pair of them as the season went on. After dominating Suzuka, Rossi would continue that momentum into the next 2 races at Fakisa Henaref, as he would get pole position, fastest lap and the race win in both, with Jerez being more of a controlled ride than Fakisa, as Rossi would end up having a close fight in that race with his good friend and 250cc rival Capirossi. A 3rd place finish would follow at Le Mans, in a race which saw his rival Biaggi take victory that day, and then at Mugello, Rossi would record his only retirement that season, as on the last lap and in wet conditions, which saw the race use the unpopular aggregate timing system due to a red flag that came out early on in the race, Rossi, whilst leading the race, would catch a wet patch on the inside curb at the penultimate corner and fall off his bike, ending his race as a result. He would thankfully bounce back at the next race at Barcelona, taking his 4th victory of the season, but the race was overshadowed by an intense confrontation that happened before the podium ceremony between Rossi and Biaggi, with Rossi allegedly striking Biaggi in the face to the point where Max had a little cut on his cheek, although he claimed at the time that the cut came from a mosquito. I'll let you be the judge on that one. This friction would transfer over at the next race at Assen, where the pair of them would have an intense fight throughout the race, with Biaggi coming out on top as a result of the race finishing early due to rain. The pair would fight each other again at the next race at Donington, however this time it would be Rossi that would come out on top, making it 2 wins in a row at Donington before finishing in a dismal 7th at the Sachsenring following a tricky qualifying session which saw him start down in 11th. And with Biaggi winning that race, it meant that in the championship, Rossi only led the standings by 10 points ahead of Biaggi, with only 7 races remaining. However, if people thought that it would end up being a close fight for the title, then they were very much mistaken, as the next 4 races would end up being a defining moment in the championship. At Brno, Rossi would qualify in 2nd, just behind his rival Biaggi, and despite the pair of them getting a poor start, both of them would regain 1st and 2nd respectively as the race progressed. The pair would end up battling for the lead, and it looked like it would go all the way to the last lap. However, with around 10 laps to go, Biaggi, clearly struggling to handle the pressure, would make a costly error at turn 8, falling off his bike in the process and handing the lead to Rossi. Biaggi would get going again, but would end up finishing in a dismal 10th, whilst Rossi cruised home to his 6th win of the season, followed on the podium by Alex Crivier and Loris Capirossi. This allowed Rossi to increase his lead in the championship to 29 points, and he would increase that lead even further at the next race at Estoril, as after grabbing the lead off Biaggi, who once again started from pole, Rossi would go on to take his 7th win of the season, whilst Biaggi, already struggling for pace after being overtaken by Capirossi, would finish down in 5th after once again falling off his bike, this time at turn 1. This saw the gap increase further to 43 points. However, at the next race at Valencia, Rossi would have a disaster, as thanks to changeable conditions, Rossi, who opted to go for a wet setup, would end up tumbling down the order once the track started to dry up and would finish in a disappointing 11th. Luckily for Rossi, Biaggi would also have a disastrous race, with him also opting to go for a wet setup, which saw him finish only a place ahead of Rossi in 10th after he passed him in the closing stages. Then a defining moment in the championship would happen at the next race at Motegi, as after jumping Rossi at the start to grab the lead, Biaggi would make a costly error on lap 5 and crash out at the third to last corner, ending his race in the process. This allowed Rossi to retake the lead, and from that point on, Rossi would not look back, as he would cruise to his 8th win of the season, allowing him to open up the points gap even further to 67 points. And with 3 races to go, it meant that Rossi had a golden opportunity to wrap up the title at the third to last race at Phillip Island. And that is exactly what he would do, as despite a scary moment early on in the race with Alex Barros, Rossi would have a back and forth battle once again with Max Biaggi for the win. And after overtaking his rival on the last lap at the third to last corner, Rossi in a photo finish would cross the line to take his 9th win of the season, and with it became the 2001 500cc champion. Despite only being in his 2nd year in the Premier class and having less experience than Biaggi, combined with the fact that he was racing for a satellite team, it was an incredible achievement, and the fact that he was able to hold his nerve and crack the more experienced Biaggi under pressure just showed how much of a special talent he really was. Rossi would go on to win the final 2 races at Sepang and Jacaré-Pagua, with the latter being won via the unpopular aggregate timing system, to finish the season with a massive 106-point lead ahead of Biaggi, affirming his dominance that season. For 2002, Rossi would finally get his move to the Repsol Honda team, where he would go on to retain his crown from 2001, and from that point, it became the last time that someone won the title with a satellite team until 2024, when Jorge Martin won his first ever Premier Class title, riding for the Pramac team, who ironically made their debut in MotoGP the same year Rossi made his move to Repsol Honda. Now, yes, you could make the argument that the reason Rossi was able to challenge for the title in 2001 was because the bike that he was riding was unofficially a Repsol Honda underneath the Nastro Azzurro branding. And whilst that's technically true, it can't detract from the fact that his entrant that year was still listed as a satellite team, so technically speaking, it still counts regardless of what bike he was riding. Plus, you also have to consider where the Repsol Honda riders were in the final standings, as whilst Rossi went on to dominate the championship, his unofficial teammates of Alex Crivier and Toru Yukawa finished down in 8th and 10th respectively, over 200 points behind him. And these 2 riders weren't pushovers, by the way, especially Alex Crivier, a man who won the 500cc crown 2 years prior, and a man who had a fierce rivalry with Mick Doohan in the second half of the 1990s. So if anything, that makes Rossi's achievement on the same machinery even more impressive. Plus, if we are going to discount this as a satellite champion for that sole reason, you might as well do the same with Jorge Martin, as he also won the title this year with factory machinery, specifically the same bike that his rival Pecco Bagnaia used this year, who, let's not forget, was riding for the factory team this year. For me, whilst Rossi arguably had more impressive title wins in the years after, the one that he won in 2001 will always stand out to me as the one that was the most unique. Not only for the fact that he became the final 500cc champion that year, but also the fact that he was able to do it with a team that wasn't officially a factory team, plus the fact that he was able to win it as a solo competitor given he didn't have a teammate that year to back him up. nor did he really have the support of the two Repsol Honda riders, given they were way off the pace to help support him. The first title is always seen as the most special, and for Rossi, that was absolutely the case, given the unique circumstances he was able to win it.